How's it going, people? Jack here with another reaction, here to check out the latest from the Kurzgesagt or In a Nutshell channel. Now, this recommendation comes straight from the Discord, and this one has to do with South Korea, a country that is finding itself in quite the kerfuffle, to say the least. And I'm saying all of this because as somebody who happened to have developed like friendships through like exchange programs in university, as well as some earlier church work that I did, was once involved into that, I did get to speak with some South Koreans about how the situation was in their country, and there were alarming comments made sometimes, but it is, as sad as it sounds, only through the exposure of like recent form of media, such as, let's say, the movies from director Bong Joon-ho, right, Parasite, and surprisingly enough, a lot of manhwas, which are Korean mangas, that I started to have like more in-depth understanding of some of these things and like the magnitude of their impact, because again, as you grow older, you get to see things from a different perspective, and perhaps that's not exactly what your friends want to dive into when they want to have just like casual conversations. But Kurzgesagt has made this video with quite a brutal title here called South Korea is Over, and I wanted to check it out, so without further ado, please do make sure to subscribe to their channel, and of course to this one if you so like to. That being said, let's get into it.
South Korea is over. This sounds brutal, but South Korea will soon start melting on all fronts. Demographically, economically, socially, culturally, and militarily. Because for decades, the country has been experiencing a fertility crisis unprecedented in human history. And we've probably reached a point of no return. By 2060, the South Korea we know and love today will no longer exist.
No Blackpink.
What will the collapse look like? And why is it now almost impossible to stop? The real population bomb. To have a stable population, you need a fertility rate of about 2.1 children per woman. In the 1950s, South Koreans used to have 6 children on average. In the 1980s, the rate fell below 2. And in 2023, it was 0.72 kids per woman, the lowest ever recorded in history.
I mean, in a way, you can kind of see like the natural progression of some of these things. If I can move my camera just slightly here so that you can see for South Africa, that is 2.2. Now, the thing is that generally it makes sense, right? As somebody who was born and slightly raised in an African country, Cameroon, I know of what it feels like to have a multitude of, not personally, but like my parents' generation had a multitude of siblings. And that was, of course, due to certain factors. One being mortality. Child mortality just meant that on a natural basis, just like in the animal kingdom, people just generally would have more kids. So too, as sad as it sounds, as a somewhat countermeasure for the possible death of one. This is of course not unique for African countries, but this happened for all around the world. But of course there is the other factor of the economy, as well as degrees of education, because once you get more educated, once you get more wealthy, you get access to more personal freedoms, you have more control over the birth that you are going to have, especially as a woman. That's where the US kind of kicked in I would say around the Second World War. That kind of gave the framework of what a general family should have looked like, right? Mother and father with like 2 children. It also very much made sense with the boom in both education and economic growth. That is why the 50s to this day are still referred to as the golden age of American capitalism. Now you have the countries like Germany, which is kind of similar to ours here in Denmark, which is at around 5, Jesus Christ, that would be a lot. 1.55 is the birth rate that we have here. And that is of course due to other factors. As we get more wealthy, more educated, and we have a lower birth rate, automatically we don't want to have that many kids, because we don't exactly see the benefits of having that many. Secondary is of course the fact that young people who are urged to enter the workforce early by stimulating education faster, giving us governmental grants, and of course the free education. All of these factors are meant to stimulate new workers, and of course we are also asked to have more children, so to provide for new taxpayers, for which I hope that you can kind of feel a little bit of cynicism in my tone when I'm saying that that I'm a parent as well, that is the thing that we sometimes discuss about our child and perhaps future prospect of having more. It is an undeniable fact, of course, that we should have more children to stimulate the economical growth and or maintain the welfare of a country, obviously. But the condition under which the children are raised are also an issue when a family cannot have just a single providers and both parents have to be out of the door. Children are then put into institutions, and there are a whole fuss about all of that, which they are underfunded, they are overworked, and the children then end up being in a very bad position later on, which then affect the scores once they enter school. But that is of course a whole different discussion. Moving then to Asian countries like China, which unfortunately was struck with the myth of the population bomb, overpopulation, and literally had to enact a one-child policy, which they kind of reversed now because of the disparity between boys and girls. And of course South Korea now, who find themselves in quite a predicament where providers here, the men or the women, truly have at least the opportunities to do anything in the workforce. There is high competitiveness within the country, and there are just general gender issues going on in South Korea right now. So when the government does not even incentivize young people to be able to have and create families, and then don't do anything about the cultural issues, then you have a cocktail for something that's quite disastrous. But yeah, I very much like this map here because while these videos of course focus on South Korea, this is a worldwide issue.
In Seoul, fertility is even lower, around 0.55. On average, about half of the women here won't have any kids, and the other half just one. What do these numbers actually mean in the real world? If fertility stays as it is, then 100 South Koreans will have 36 kids. When they grow up, they will have 13 kids, who will then have 5. Within 4 generations, 100 South Koreans will turn into 5. If we look at today's South Korean population pyramid, we see this is pretty real. There's only one 1-year-old for 4 50-year-olds. After 4 decades below the replacement level, the consequences were still largely invisible. Today, South Korea's population is at an all-time high, as are its workforce and its GDP, which is still growing. But demographics hits you like a freight train. You hear it vaguely in the distance, and then it runs you over. South Korea is about to be hit. Let's time travel 35 years into the future to 2060 and see what the country will look like then. When it comes to demographics, the most commonly used projections are those put together by the UN. They envisage 3 scenarios: low fertility, medium, and high. But in the past, all medium UN projections for South Korea have consistently been too positive. Between 2022 and 2023 alone,
the risk that is
in South Korea dropped by another 8%. So we're going to use the latest low fertility scenario, which has been the most accurate in the last few years. Keep in mind that we're still talking about projections, and the future is a faraway land. Okay, let's do it. In 2060, South Korea's population pyramid will look like this. The population will have shrunk by 30%. 16 million South Koreans will have disappeared in just 35 years. And it'll be the oldest country in human history. 1 in 2 South Koreans will be over the age of 65. Less than 1 in 10 will be under 25. And only 1 in 100 will be small children.
Oh my days. I often find myself in a situation where I relive the words that my parents would say all the time of, you only get this when you become a parent yourself. Which, I mean, there's some truth to that. One of those is we generally, as young adults and or teenagers or so, kind of dislike the loudness of young children, right? Of toddlers especially. They scream, they are so noisy. But can you imagine just going somewhere and not seeing people or children, playing around? Because that to me tends to usually be like a great indicator of a place is fine. A place is almost like thriving. If you have children in the streets playing ball or whatever, having fun, it's usually like a great indicator of the place that you're finding yourself is doing pretty good, emotionally speaking at least. But going to a place that just feels like everybody was struck with reverse Benjamin Button disease and the last remainder is just some little child under 5 is crazy.
Imagine waking up in a country where the streets are strangely quiet with no children playing on them. Entire cities have been abandoned.
Yeah.
Half of the population is elderly and living either alone or in overcrowded retirement homes, with a minority of people desperately trying to keep society running. There will be a few major consequences. Economic collapse. In 2023, a breathtaking 40% of South Koreans over 65 lived below the poverty line. But in
oh my God, I'm sorry. I just have to point out one thing. I've been following some of the insane debacle that's been going on in the politics of South Korea, which is a country that never really had any luck with their leaders at all. I might comment on that a bit later, but they had a proposition of raising the work hours to 69 hours a week, which is insane. It's absolutely insane. Like, I've seen documentaries on Japan, now a bit of a different country, granted, but where elderlies have to work long hours during the night because one, there are pension funds. I know that South Korea is pretty high, so that's a great thing. But when you don't have young adults, right, working, young people providing taxes for the government, the pension funds, the burden of that is then put on the workers to provide. And then who the hell is going to be running the elderly homes? And how many elderlies are going to be able to do all of this manual labor? Like, it's freaking insane. And I know that more and more countries are doing this. I've seen some stuff with the US, who I know it's not perfect with pensions. What was the stat that I saw not too long ago? That the projected idea was that like 13% at least of one's income should have been from, or at least 13% of what incomes should have gone towards one's work life, should have gone into the pension, but only like 3 or so percent do that because people just genuinely don't invest themselves into the pension plans, which is why I know there's such things as a 401k is far from perfect. Anything that came out of the Reagan eras have not been good, but that has at least been somewhat of an attempt to get people to automatically invest into their own future. But this figure right here, 40% living under the poverty, oh my, this is wild.
Taking 40% of South Koreans over 65 lived below the poverty line, but in 2060, this number may seem lovely in comparison. Today, South Korea has one of the largest pension funds in the world, worth about 730 billion US dollars. But it's projected to stop growing in the 2040s and be completely depleted by the 2050s. So in 2060, pensions will have to be paid by the working population. Estimates vary, but for a pension system to work, the minimum a society needs is between 2 to 3 workers per retiree paying for them with their taxes. But even if we assume that all South Koreans over 15 will be working in 2060, the country will have less than 1 worker per senior. Workers will be unable to stem the incredible costs. So not only will poverty among the elderly be common, but a big chunk will be forced to work. Except they may not be able to find jobs because by 2060, the South Korean economy may have collapsed. Broadly speaking, the size of an economy is linked to the size of its workforce. To have a big economy, you need a lot of workers to produce a lot of things and a lot more people to buy them. Today, South Korea has about 37 million people of working age, generating a GDP of about 1.7 trillion US dollars. But by 2060, its workforce would have shrunk to less than half, to about 17 million. Of course, technological progress means that productivity will be higher and each individual will probably produce more than today. But even if productivity keeps growing at the same rate or more than we've seen in the last decades, South Korea's GDP could peak in the 2040s. In other words, South Korea will enter a permanent economic recession. There are more optimistic projections that see the recession begin as late as 2050, but they're based on the medium UN demographic scenario, and there are no signs that we're heading there. Another factor in the economy is science, technology, and innovation, areas in which big leaps are typically made by young adults and the middle-aged.
Yeah, So many grants and prizes have been won in the last decades by young people. But our minds are fresh. We get to do some amazing things, and that's just across history. That's just true. I'm always reminded of Isaac Newton, right? Again, more of a thing for physics graduate here. But dude goes on to invent calculus, right? Principia Mathematica, just to explain the stuff that he's trying to relate to people. Makes gravitational theories, goes into optics, all of that, and finally turns 26. Like, come the fuck on.
Young people have fresh ideas that contribute to the wealth of society. Significantly fewer people working also means way less tax for the government, which will be trapped between a rock and a hard place.
Right.
On the one hand, having to provide for half the population that are seniors, on the other, seeing its income diminish. It will be forced to shut down or cut essential services like hospitals or social benefits. Since infrastructure only works at scale, smaller communities may be abandoned as the country contracts into its metropolitan areas.
Which they already are. I brought Japan as an example before, but you don't have to look too far. Yeah, most people are moving towards the Sky Universities in South Korea, because that's what socially is deemed to be the best thing to do. You need to have some of the high-paying jobs so to survive. And if you are not part of a Sky University, then what are you doing then? And crazy enough, not having a high education and spending exorbitant amount of money on not just tuition, but for studies, extracurricular, because your kid needs to spend like 12 hours studying a day. It is frowned upon to not be an elitist. At least not have an elitist mind when it comes to education. And the responses for a lot of governments have been so bad because growth just had to be maximized, right? Urging young people especially to take like other jobs, making like less academically based jobs attractive was not the focus, because those weren't the things that made the economy grow faster. And now they're having to give people bonds and or like grants so that they can relocate. And of course, this is not unique to South Korea and or Japan, which are like the extreme examples. My family and I, had like a cross-country trip not too long ago where we went from Spain to Italy, like through Milan and so on, all over to Switzerland through the Como Sea, wherein there were places like, oh my god, what are those islands called? Sardinia, where they are giving grants of like 10,000s of euros so that new inhabitants will move over there because they have like population of like a few thousands. Yeah, the extreme urbanization is a thing, I understand it. We have that too here as well in Denmark, but we decide currently to move towards more rural areas. I, for example, am currently living in the countryside because one, is more affordable, is more quiet, and yeah, it's just good for the mind. But if you then want to have people move towards regions where they actually have to work more and pay more to live there, at least make it somewhat attractive to a certain degree. Let's say, for example, Denmark, again, I know that I'm kind of glazing my country right now, but like in areas like Copenhagen, that was plagued with a lot of bad stuff, like say the seas, the lakes over there were polluted. Those things were invested in so that it was made clean. Collective heating became a thing so that people would spend less money on that because the rent is already high. It is still growing, right? Rent prices have not been falling down in the last few years, but because of those things, people kind of still feel like, okay, it's fine, we have to pay extra to live in the city, but there are amenities that make sense for us. Like central heating units, for example, Copenhagen, if you've ever heard of that one, is a place where we're literally burning our trash to create heating. And it is also made as an alternative skiing resort, like an artificial skiing place. So things like that, third places, things where people can go together and meet each other and just talk, have a nice time, are important if you're going to put people in a stressful environment. Give them something where they can relax and or detox, if you want to use that word. That at least I feel like is the proper way of approaching urbanization. But then again, of course, we're speaking about extreme cases here.
And of course, there won't be enough money to invest in the future. This is bad. But what will happen to South Korean society and culture may be worse. Societal and cultural collapse. Speculating on how societies will develop is extra hard, but there are a few pretty unavoidable trends. Today, already about 20% of Koreans live alone. Also, 20% report having no close friends or relatives. By 2060, 50% of South Koreans aged 70 will have no siblings and 30% will have no children.
Oh.
Young adults between 25 and 35 will only make up 5% of the population and typically have no siblings at all. This leaves the elderly with almost no close family and young adults with little family and few potential friends, especially outside of big cities.
The real
loneliness epidemic of epic proportions is all but guaranteed.
I just feel very bad for a lot of South Koreans because while a lot of us are being exposed to these news in the last few years especially, these are things that they grew up in. They've experienced this in real time. And all that they can truly say is just like, it's too late. We've seen this coming and we had no way of stopping it because, yes, demonstration and things, people are taking onto the streets to try to prevent this from happening, but they've been doing this for years.
On top of that, South Korean culture will probably experience a huge decline. In 2000, there were 17.5 million South Koreans between 25 and 45, and they made up 37% of the population. This was the generation that brought us K-pop, K-drama, K-food, and many other trends that spread around the world. In 2060, there will be just 5.6 million people in that age group, and they'll only be 16% of the population.
Ooh, which means that one, they will not be able to import external culture, refine it, repackage it, and export it to the degree where everybody wants what they provide. And not even such things as immigration is going to be able to mitigate this. Because you need to have people who come in, who have a desire to work and or need to be integrated into society. They need to learn a bunch of stuff. They need to be viable for the workforce and so on and so forth. Nothing can save that.
Many cultural traditions are already struggling
and
because the older
on
generations are having trouble finding young people to pass them on to. As young people disappear, many traditions will die out. Without young people, the soul of South Korean culture will shrink and wither away. And on a personal level, what kind of experience will it be growing up in 2060? What will youth culture be like in a country of seniors, where many universities, schools and kindergartens are abandoned as there are no longer children to fill them with life? What kind of job prospects will they face, and what will politics look like? If young people don't want to remain alone, they'll concentrate in Seoul or a few other big cities, or worse for South Korea, emigrate to other countries. Rural areas will decline, and most smaller cities will turn into ghost towns. We're already seeing this in Japan, which has almost 10 million abandoned houses in rural areas. Large parts of South Korea will simply vanish and be reclaimed by nature. Last but not least, South and North Korea are technically at war, and they could very well still be in 2060.
For which is crazy because the North isn't experiencing near as much of an issue with this, which is even more wild when you realize that whatever it was that both the Soviet Union and the US was trying to create right post the Korean War, they both succeeded in creating the worst implementation of both of the political systems and economical system especially. Also capitalism and some communism that just down the drain. But okay, while the current, my French, pornographically poor depiction that North Korea has had in the last few years, after the Korean War, right, after the separation there, they were for decades thriving more than South Korea. Now, there are of course a bunch of reasons for that, because they had somewhat of a basic plan economy that somewhat worked for them, and South Korea was constantly under threats of dictators, leaders that just were corrupt off the wazoo. I think Moon Jae-in, is the second to last president that the South Korea has. I know that the current one was replaced by another dude. It doesn't count. He was there for like a week or something. But Moon Jae-in had his dramas, right? Because of the whole Samson families and so on and so forth, which all of them kind of had an involvement in. But he supposedly is the only one who wasn't put in jail. Every single other ones were either attempted murdered, chased out of the country, like the very first leader, Sigmund Rhee, and so on. It has been so tumultuous. And now, when we're talking about this birth rate situation, North Korea, who isn't facing as much of a birth rate issue, can basically just play the waiting game.
Will South Korea still be able to afford to have its young men do 18 months of mandatory military service? Today, 5% of men of combat age are enrolled in the military. In 2060, it would have to be 15% just to match today's numbers. Okay, wait, this is all a bit much. Is there no way back? Why, there really is no way back. The problem with the demographic freight train is that once it hits, things become irreversible. Let's say fertility in South Korea magically triples to the replacement rate of 2.1 children per woman and stays there. In 2060, it will be an inverted pyramid on top of a barrel. And there would still be only 1.5 people of working age per senior over 65. Even in the best made-up scenario, South Korea has to pass through an unavoidable bottleneck before it will recover. But there is also a kernel of hope here. Yes, the situation is grim, but at least in the long term, recovery is possible if South Korea enacts rapid and societal changes that make its population want to have kids again. In 2024, births rose for the first time in 9 years, 3% more than in 2023. But for that to continue, South Korea needs to face the music and ask how they got to this point. How could it get that bad?
Yeah.
In general, as societies get richer, more educated, and child mortality plummets, people decide to have fewer kids. What makes South Korea special is that it's somehow supercharging all of these trends. South Korea lifted itself out of poverty in record time, but in doing so it developed a unique kind of workaholism and extreme competitiveness. Although the work week is 40 hours and the legal maximum is 52 per week, unpaid overtime is normal for many, and the government even proposed to raise legal work time to 69 hours per week. Despite this, South Korea has relatively low wages and a high cost of living. Real estate in big cities is out of reach for most people. The cost of education is extremely high, since families have to pay for private lessons if they want to send their kids to a high-tier college. All of this while South Korea spends less on family benefits than most other rich countries.
Yeah.
Old-fashioned cultural norms make matters even worse. Marriage is all but mandatory if a couple wants to start a family. In 2023, only 4.7% of babies were born to unmarried women.
Yeah, and abortion, which is of course an important thing to have in this equation, was just, I think in 2022, made not illegal in South Korea. So it's not legal, it's just not illegal anymore.
Out of all developed countries, South Korean men do just about the least share of housework and childcare within their families.
Yeah.
This leaves women with a disproportionate amount of work if they want to keep their jobs after a pregnancy, while many men are overwhelmed by the societal expectation to be the main breadwinner and have successful careers.
And this has supercharged what I like to call like technology in misogyny, where there are every single thing that now feels like something catering towards women feels like an advantage for them, which of course feels like a disadvantage for a lot of South Korean young men, especially young men. Because there were trends some years ago, I don't know if it is as prevalent as it was, but trends of literally men taking pictures of themselves in like pregnant seats in public transportation as a way of protesting the advantage that women were getting. It was getting that crazy. which then, of course, on the flip side, with women who don't have the prospect to be able to return back to the workforce because their husbands are not going to be taking care of the kids because they too are way too overburdened, they start kicking off stuff like the 4B movement because they are being exposed to so much misogyny and so much like societal critique that they don't want to even have relationship with men anymore. And the response then from the side of the government is to kickstart things like, I can't remember exactly when it was it like a couple of years ago, where there was a proposition from some political think tank that wanted girls to start in university and or just education as a whole 1 year earlier than men because it would have made them more attractive. I am not bullshitting you. I am pretty certain that was the thing that was found to an article that I read in The Guardian. Because it's one of those things that shock you so much that you think that it's a joke, but it's actually true. And over there, in real life, the experience that some of us will like get through like online discourse of like, oh, there's a character that is designed weirdly in a video game so it doesn't appeal to the male fantasy anymore, actually led to real life protest. And people being fired for their job for not designing a character more sexy. Like, it feels like such a dystopia. But I don't know how they're going to reverse this unless they are actually able to like sit down and have proper conversations like actual adults and not always just trying to cast blames and like using ad hominems all the times. I don't know. I have no idea how they're going to go about it, but they need to do something.
Starting a family or not is a personal decision, and most South Koreans are deciding against it. The bottom line is that South Korea has created a culture that leads to very few kids. Conclusion. Demographic collapse is not an abstract thing in the future, it's happening right now. And it's not just South Korea.
Yeah.
In 2023, China had a fertility rate of 1, Italy and Spain 1.2, Germany 1.4, the UK 1.6, and the US 1.6. Which sounds so much better, doesn't it?
No.
Well, after 4 generations, a fertility rate of 1.6 means 60% fewer new people. A fertility rate of 1.2 means 87% fewer people. And fertility rates are still falling with no sign of stabilization or recovery. The weirdest thing about all of this is that almost nobody involved in the public discourse has truly grasped the gravity of the situation. The last century was utterly dominated by overpopulation narratives, and people who say that we need more kids seem weird.
And now it's
if you do the maths,
underpopulation.
the future just seems to be too insane to be true, like it's hard to believe. None of this has ever happened before. So, low birth rates are mostly discussed in the context of worker shortages, not as the existential threat to our societies, cultures, wealth, and our way of life that they are. If we don't take it seriously very soon and change the DNA of our modern societies in a way that encourages young people to start having children again, then the rest of the century will be pretty grim, for those of us who will live through it. The demographic freight train stops for nobody. We finally need to realize that it's hurtling down the tracks right at us. Multi-layered issues like demographic change are hard to break through in our current media landscape and easy to miss out on. This is why we rely on ground news.
It's actually an important thing here.
Ally in helping find real stories of importance amongst the jumble of information
how
we're
this news get
confronted with
covered
every day.
also affects
In a
us.
nutshell, the app and website gather the world's news in one place so you can compare coverage, see the bigger picture, and make informed decisions. Using ground news, you can see that earlier this year, South Korea was officially classified as a super-age society, a term that basically summarizes the effects we described in this video. But less than 100 sources covered this development. Interestingly, less than 20% of them are left-leaning media. Ground News has a special feature, the blind spot feed, that draws attention to stories like that which get lost amidst your personal publication preferences. Most importantly, you can clearly compare how the issue was covered. A government-funded source out of Slovenia, for example, mentioned Europe is considering immigration as part of a solution, while Korea, Japan and China are avoiding that aspect. This way, you can get a balanced account and come to a conclusion for yourself. We encourage you to sign up at ground.news/KIN or scan the QR code and save 40% off their unlimited access Vantage plan. Our link brings the price down to just $5 a month. By subscribing via ground.news/KIN, your investment directly supports Kurzgesagt, plus helps Ground News stay independent and able to provide a tool that's now more important than ever.
I think that there is an important discussion to be had when it comes to the coverage of these issues, because the unfortunate nature of it is that it has been affected a lot by the polarization of both the media and, of course, politics, right? That is unavoidable. Just like I mentioned, some of the issues there with a bit more of a conservative views on the side of many politicians in South Korea in comparison to what some in the public sphere actually wanted, especially women. There's been a huge disparity in how this issue, the approach to these issues have been. And usually, this is not to say everybody thinks takes it away, but like from the conservative side, there's been the rhetoric of how it is that the loss of the core traditional family has been the result of this erosion of children. That because we no longer adhere to the fundamentals of a father and a mother, therefore, children are not being born, despite the fact that even gay couples are able to have children, either through adoption or in vitro fertilization and all that, and all blaming it on contraceptives, that those are also the work of the devil. I'm being a bit facetious here and working a bit of extremes, but these are literal rhetoric points that are being made use of. Whereas, of course, on the more progressive / perhaps also at times liberal side of things, there's been a huge focus on the individual, like provide the individual with choices and give them the ability to want to become a stay-at-home mom and or participate in the workforce as much as they want to. The whole thing is about this. Just like they pointed out at the end of the video, give young people the incentive to do so. Because as it turns out, unsurprisingly, making use of the full scale and the talents of all components, all parts of your population tends to make it more economically thriving. And so, of course, having more women in the workforce is a positive, it's a plus. But very few of them will want to participate in said workforce and also be mothers if they do not have an incentive to do so. So while the solutions, of course, are things that need to be discussed, like the approach is not exactly rocket science, right? In the same light that us young men were urged to like get into the military, just how awesome it would be to join the troops and or go to work on an oil rig to feel like a real man. Give women an opportunity, make something that actually feels appealing for them to be a stay-at-home mom if that's what they want to. It's all about choices. And the same thing should of course be applying to men. At least that is how I see it. What are your thoughts in the comment section below? I know that about almost a year by now we had a similar discussion, and yeah, if you want to see that video about the myth of the overpopulation, which was a thing that was sparked by Paul Ehrlich, right, this mathematician who thought that his math was correct and inevitably made one of the leaders of the Federal Reserve make the likeness of overpopulation to that of the hydrogen bomb was fake. Freaking insane comparison to make. But yeah, we covered something similar to that, so if you want to check that video out, it's somewhere right here. That being said, thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, don't forget to hit that like and also subscribe button. Wish you all to have a wonderful day and see you guys in the next one. Bye.